All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get started and people can join us as they dial into yet another Zoom call. Welcome to Riding the 2020 Roller Coaster, a webinar designed to help you master the ups and downs of getting your new products to market. Thank you for taking time to connect with us today. I'm Lisa Jackson, and I'll be your moderator. This session continues the conversation that we started in July at the IFT show, where we talked about how to navigate and innovate in a changing world using lessons from the toilet paper aisle. In this session, and let me go ahead and share my screen. You'll learn how the current landscape has affected the product launch cycle this year. We'll be sharing insights from Mintel's global new products and menu databases. We'll also be talking about short-term solutions as well as the long-term effects that we think are going to carry and affect new product development in 2021. Before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. I wanted to let you know that you will have access to a recording of today's session. It usually takes us about 24 hours to download it and edit it, make a few changes to make sure you have a good experience when you watch it. I'll let you know as soon as it's available. And if you do have questions, please use the Q&A function in the webinar to submit them. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can while we're together today. But if we don't get to your question, we'll follow up with you directly afterward. Let's introduce today's panelists. Well, you've already met me. In addition to hosting today's webinar, I support National Flavors marketing and communications activities. My background centers in marketing, development, strategy, and execution informed by consumer insights. I worked for both branded and private brand companies supporting retail and food service customers. Also joining us today is Dr. Polly Barrett. She's our commercial and technical expert, and she has held several expansive roles supporting customer product launches through development, testing, and commercialization of new flavors. Her doctorate from Western Michigan University included exploring statistical modeling to analyze sensory and testing data for food. Polly also holds a master's degree in food science from Kansas State University and a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Kalamazoo College. She's also completed certification courses in sensory and consumer studies at the University of California, Davis. So we're very glad to have her expertise with us today. Now, before I start talking about launch trends, I wanted to ask you a question. On a scale of roller coaster, what has product development felt like for you in 2020? Was it a boomerang? Was it a big dive? Or was it completely suspended? I'm going to launch a poll. If you'll take a moment and just answer that question, we'll see what kind of results we get. Oh, yeah. You come up with some different words than I expected. Okay. All right, let me end the polling and share some results so you can all see where your colleagues. So it looks like the majority of our crew today felt that new product development in 2020 was a spinning experience. We had a few that were suspended, one twister, a couple corkscrews, and a catapult. Let me go ahead and close that. So it looks like everyone had somewhat of a unique ride when trying to launch new products in 2020. Let's review the North American, whoops, sorry about that, let me go up. Let's review the North American launch trends to see if your experience parallels the broader marketplace. Launching new products has always been a wild ride. When we look back over a decade of experience, you can see ups and downs that reflect both economic changes as well as marketplace dynamics. But in general, across the decade, and recognizing that Mintel data doesn't capture all new product launches, there is in general an upward trajectory over time. And that's largely because the barriers to entry have lowered over time. You know, co-packers will now take on startups to help fill plant capacity. We've seen the rise of incubators, many of them sponsored by large CPG organizations who give the financial boost to startups to get them out of the basement and garage into commercialization and on shelf. Certainly, e-commerce has exploded, and so has easy access outlets like farmers markets. All of these give startups and entrepreneurs a test market, an easy way and an inexpensive way to test their product, as well as to gain new distribution. Unfortunately, these factors place a tremendous amount of pressure on CPG organizations to get to market much more quickly and cost effectively than ever before. Now, we know history doesn't predict the future. That's certainly the case this year, but we can glean information from patterns and activity. So we look deeper into quarterly trends in launches to try to get some additional insights. We reviewed quarterly launch activity over the past 10 years, and usually the second half picks up momentum. Last year, launches in the back half were up about 7% versus 2018. And in combined, Q3 and Q4 represent about 52% of the annual activity. So that's where you see that heaviness in the back half. Unfortunately, in 2020, while we started out doing great with an 8% increase in Q1, and surprisingly, we stayed level, if not upticked a little bit in Q2, despite the shutdowns. Between working from home, labs being shuttered, and an overall economic downturn, launch activity fell off significantly in Q3. We saw it down 6%. This wasn't surprising in a way because when we talked to webinar participants in July, many of them said they were pulling back on launch activity. What did surprise us was the magnitude of the fall off. If we're to keep pace with what we've seen historically and try to get the bulk of new product activity happening in the back half of the year, that means that in Q4, we need to see launch activity up about 2.5%. So with that as a general forecast, I have another poll for you. We're a few weeks into Q4. So tell me, are you planning to launch more new products, stick with your original launch plan, or are you still pulling back on launches? So let me launch that poll. I'll go to that poll. One moment, please. Okay. If you could just take a minute and let us know what your landscape looks like. What part of the roller coaster are you on in this quarter? Well, it's neck and neck between pulling back and launching more. We'll see what comes up. So when I share results, you can see we are pretty evenly split between launching more and pulling back. And there are a couple people that are going to actually stick with their original launch plan. So we'll regroup again at the beginning of the year to see where we netted out. I'm not a betting person. I think it could go either way at this point. Let me go ahead and do that. So, we did want to dive a little bit deeper into the quarterly trends to see what kinds of categories were driving the change. And that may inform where we go in 2021 for growth. So as we mentioned, the year burst out with some really great performance. 60% of the categories tracked by Mintel had more new products launched versus a year ago. The categories that are highlighted here in green are those that are indexing above average. I'll dig a little bit deeper into these. Meatless products gained traction. Within wet soup, the growth that you see here in launch activity was driven by bone broth. Under pasta sauces, it was all about clean label and organic. And brands Big Bang and Rockstar were two of the newer sports drinks this year. On the flavored alcoholic beverage side, we saw brands from Bud Light, their Bud Light Seltzer, and Truly were at the top of the leaderboard. We saw cage-free and pasture-free eggs jump significantly, and more than 30 new flavored creamers hit the marketplace in the first quarter. Now, several of the growth categories that are gaining traction fall into the area that McKinsey calls conscious eating. You may have heard of this as mindful eating also, but it's knowing where does my food come from? What is the source? What's in it? What's it going to do for me? It's important to note that about 50% of consumers in developing countries view conscious eating and mindful eating as something that's very important to them now. Shifting on to Q2, even with the COVID-19 shutdown, we mentioned, we have a little bit of growth, and 57% of the categories tracked by Mintel had more launches versus last year. Again, if we look at the categories that are indexing high for driving that increase, we saw within nut spreads, almond butters, organic rising again, and peanut powder launches really soaring. Look at that increase. It was off a small base. We also saw more upscale and organic cheeses. And In dressings, more than 100 new dressings entered the market, along with more than 170 new poultry products. And the themes within poultry were around prepackaged, organic again, and flavored. We also saw sauces picking up a bit of momentum. Now, we expected Q3 to reflect the slowdown, right? With labs shuttered, as we mentioned, and scattered teams, everybody pulling back on their launch schedule. 53% of categories had fewer launches in Q3 of this year. Surprisingly, when you look at the ones that are highlighted in particular, and even those that aren't, many of these categories with less launch activity are in the center store. Now, if you think about it, though, food sourcing for consumers shifted from food service to grocery, and manufacturers, boy, talk about a roller coaster, whatever that sensation is where you shoot out of the roller coaster at 150 miles an hour, that must have been what manufacturers felt like as they had to deal with demand for core items. We saw that plant capacity was not only dedicated, but it was stretched to fill orders for existing products. And there was no time for plant trials or new innovations. So the retail side of the business is only half the equation, certainly half of the consumer's experience. Food service innovation is another ride for them, and it is one that is also slowing, but there are pockets of upside that we wanted to share with you today. Now, Mintel tracks quarterly menu trends. They actually count the number of items on a menu, and you'll see that data through Q2 of 2020 shows a 20% fall off in assortment. Just as we saw at the grocery shelf, food service operators are facing supply chain and resource constraints. But unlike food retailers, food service has had to deal with decreased foot traffic and slowing demand. Most have had to find ways to stay open, including curbside and delivery options. Some have even explored new packaging like single serve as a way to keep their doors open. They reduced their menu items to their top sellers, and they've slowed LTOs, limited time offers, and their innovations. We saw a similar downturn on the beverage side of the menu. And we're highlighting this trend because food service often drives packaged food innovations. And so some of the slowdown in Q3 launch activity, we feel at retail could have been affected by the less innovation by chefs at restaurants. Despite that sobering data, there are some bright spots, and that's what we wanted to talk to you about today. Celebrations are a core part of our culture, and food and drink plays a big role in helping us connect with each other and create happy memories, and we certainly need to do that more than ever. These 3 launches are examples. So we see a birthday cake smoothie, a general celebration donut, and then importantly for family gatherings, you see this family-sized packaging emerging in food service. Another pocket of growth is in this area of specialty diets. So consumer interest in dairy alternatives, plant-based foods, and gluten-free continues to grow. And here are 3 examples where the food service operators are staying with familiar comfort food forms and flavors, right? These are all fairly mainstream, but they're doing it in a way that's addressing consumer needs. Another specialty diet that's worth highlighting is this idea of keto. Mentions of keto-friendly claims on menus increased a whopping 6,000% over the last 4 years. Granted, we probably started with 1, but still, that's tremendous growth in a fairly short period of time within food and beverage. Even though 5% of consumers in their recent Mintel survey strictly follow a keto diet, you know there's a lot of people out there that are dabbling in diets, and they would like to see options like this on the menu. And frankly, when you look at these 2, the smoked brisket keto bowl and the avocado chicken club, those are just tasty in and of themselves, regardless of the keto benefit. So that would attract anyone looking for something that's just tasty. We've started to see keto move from the menu to the retail shelf. North American launches of food and beverages with keto claims increased from 80 last year to more than 400 this year, across 26 of the 58 categories that Mintel tracks. The heaviest activity was in snack and cereal and energy bars, meal replacements, baking mixes, seasonings, and table sauces, but you'll see here there's an example of cereal and ice cream as well. The last area that we want to talk about in food service that could inform retail innovation is this idea of regionality. International travel has been curtailed, and we see reduced interest in longer journeys, and more consumers are taking road trips. They're usually short, less than 100 miles, and many of them are spontaneous. This is according to Guesty, a software firm that tracks property rentals. And until a reliable COVID vaccine is available, travel experts predict that this new behavior is going to stick around. This gives food service operators the opportunity to deliver food adventures through the regional tastes that they're known for. So you see a few examples here, a nice Georgia peach martini and something that's related to California. And we do see this then extending into the retail shelf already. Consumers can experience regional favorites and flavors just from their regular grocery store. I like the idea of that pure maple syrup. Innovation remains essential to fulfilling consumer needs from food service. These are results from a September Data Essential survey from this year. And it shows, consumers are tired of cooking at home. They're bored with comfort food. They really view the opportunity to dine out as a treat and a way to escape confinement. They'll even take the patio because it helps them feel a little bit normal. And with all that in mind, for most of them, 3/4 of them, social distancing and wearing a mask is well worth the effort to be able to go back into a restaurant. From a flavor perspective, food service cravings align with consumer favorites, and that's not a surprise. But when you filter it a little bit and look at it from what do you want outside your kitchen, you'll see that many home chefs are longing for different cuisines. They've had to make do with their culinary skills and whatever they could find at the grocery store. So this is an opportunity for both food service and food manufacturers to continuing offering global flavors. So with these market insights as a backdrop, informing us about new areas or categories where your brands could play, I'm going to turn it over to Polly, who are going to give you tips about how to win. Thank you, Polly.
All right, well, thank you, Lisa. That was a great intro and kind of marketing trends on what's been happening. I'm going to take the approach a little bit differently, more focused towards the teams and kind of how the teams are doing during this roller coaster. So first of all, let's take a look at a recent study that was put out by McKinsey and Company. This one I thought was pretty interesting because it basically talked about an acceleration factor on how quickly we just got things done. So a lot of pressure put on teams more recently to switch to remote work or get more digital, whether it's website or get that last mile delivery piece kind of figured out. What we saw was in the survey, basically, if we expected it was going to take 454 days, so basically a year and a half to get our workforce to work remotely, when we had to, we got that done in 10 days. I mean, that's that G-force acceleration. The ride is going so fast because we have to go fast. When restaurants started seeing shutdowns and social distancing rules and state by state having, regulations around what you can do, they had to find a different way to stay in business. They had to find how to get it delivery service. Restaurants that weren't even doing delivery service were doing delivery service. And that includes the use of, last mile delivery services, a lot more, you get those delivery people that are just coming to your Grubhub, that type of a thing. You also saw a lot more in terms of remote ordering, being able to just use your app and things like that. So things that were expected to take a year and a half, we're getting done in 10 and 20 days. That type of pressure, I think, is going to stay with us for next year. Long gone are the year-long projects. I think the teams are going to be under a lot of pressure to get things done fast because we proved this year that we can get things done fast. So I'm going to start the journey through the different roller coaster rides that different teams have been on. I've been in, kind of touching base with R&D teams over this year. I'd liken them to the ride of the bumper cars. So lots of roadblocks put in their way. Every time they think they're heading down a path, all of a sudden they kind of bump into something and it spins them in a different direction. Maybe not always a predictable direction. So, the challenge number one they ran into is all of a sudden they can't get into the lab. They can't get in to finish their plant trial. I heard breweries say, I had a batch of beer in process and I couldn't even finish my batch of beer. I had to throw away my experiment, right? I think what's going to happen on the temporary side is a lot less vetting. You don't have the time and lab access to do that full trial and full shelf life study and pilot plant trial. I think that's going to be a longer term influence as well. The teams are just going to be under pressure to make decisions with a lot less data. Scientists tend to love data and want to be able to, kind of dot every I and cross every T. And this year proved to be challenging to do that, and changes had to be made quickly. I think another thing that was a big challenge for R&D people is the change in their focus from maybe less new product development and more just, hey, we can't get whatever the basic supply chain ingredients were. Can you do a reformulation? Can you do an ingredient change? Can you do a, cost reduction because all of a sudden it's super expensive. I have to buy it from a different supplier. Maybe I can't buy it at all. And I do think that longer term, that new product development, as Lisa mentioned, that influence of the restaurants and the chefs and the creative ideas coming out of more food service, they're just not going to have that for the retail pack because we just didn't see new launches in restaurants this year. So I think that's all going to kind of stall some new product development for 2021. And then again, kind of tying into the longer term plan and just the agility that we had this year happen. I think people are just long-term planning for 2021 launches is kind of out the window. It's got to be quick innovation. This year, obviously, people made really drastic changes. All of a sudden, you were a brewery, now you're making hand sanitizer. You were a t-shirt company, now you're making face masks. I think the ability to shift quickly to a different type of product, I think that's going to be here to stay. I do think it's hard right now to even talk 2021 and new product development goals, just because so many people are still a little bit functioning in crisis mode. So ways to kind of mitigate that. One example I bring in is kind of an if-then statement. When I was a kid, I used to read these books and they were, if Bobby is walking down the hallway, should he go in the door? If he opens the door, go to page 2. If he walks by and doesn't open the door, go to page 9. I used to love those if-then books. And I think that's the way we need to approach new product development for next year, is really just come up with a series of if statements. If we need new launches, here's what we got. If we need cost savings, here's what we'll do. If we need to SKU rationalize, here's our approach at that. Be ready for that, kind of changing bumper car direction quickly, just by kind of planning out different potential scenarios and having a plan that you could go execute. That doesn't mean you have to do everything on the then statement, but certainly being ready to change direction based on what happens, I think, is a key. The other piece to this is going to be, without those new, all those restaurant ideas hitting, you're going to have to find new sources of ideas. Lisa mentioned, how much home cooking and all of those people, are kind of getting tired of comfort food, but, these people are at home Googling things. I think it's always fun to look at social media, whether it's Pinterest or, look at Google search terms, just see what people are looking for, recipes they're finding. Maybe they all of a sudden had, a friend that invited them over for a home cooked meal and they'd never had the cuisine before. There may be some interesting trends there. I think always paying attention to ingredient trends within your food category is key. And then I think finding food safety practice ways to kind of bring that in as well. So the next section, I'll kind of show you a little bit of new ingredients in the set and one key segment and how you can really leverage that for some of the product development. Realizing this year has been a little slow with those new product launches. This is a Mintel data that basically looks at ingredient trends. So here's hot beverages, and it's over a couple years, but basically it looks for, any uptick in this year compared to last year, so the last 12 months. So things in hot beverages like orange peel and clove, it kind of makes you think of chai tea type things. One trend that I've seen that I know we get asked for quite a bit is hibiscus. So I think you're starting to see that as an uptick. Again, that is kind of meshes well with that whole I didn't get to travel, but maybe I wanted a Caribbean beverage. Things like cardamom are another kind of popular trend in the beverage sector, particularly hot beverages. So all of these are, different things that are happening in that space. When you look at brand new ingredients that are hitting, so there's some fun ones there, different types of fiber and gelatin, cannabis, that one hit the list. So there's no surprises there, I think, for many of us. You see some other fun ingredients like different types of honey and honey flavors. So again, looking at the ingredient trends by sector can help you get ideas. This is the same type of data for desserts and ice cream. And here you see, not so many specific flavors on the flavor side. You see raspberry kind of hit here. But what I thought was really insightful here is this oat milk. So, all of a sudden, more than, 2% here, 3%, a lot of people are starting to look at these oat-based products. So we kind of unpack that a little bit deeper and really look at how many different launches and percent of launches have started to hit with oat milk-based products. So here we see back in 2016, very, very few launches were actually in oat milk. Now all of a sudden, we're going to have this huge uptick. It's like a hockey stick, really. And so this is oat milk, in terms of like frozen desserts and dairy. When you dig into the flavors that were launched for oat milk, it kind of shows what we were talking about with the new functional ingredient, new base, new, trendy thing we're looking at. Doesn't mean we have to have new flavor profiles. You still see things like chocolate, strawberry, banana, brown sugar, cookie dough. I know we worked on a project for, oat milk that tasted like an oatmeal raisin cookie. They were trying to just play off of the oaty, kind of grainy characteristics. So again, just some fun trends there. Next, we're going to shift into procurement's ride. Procurement's ride has just been a very different journey. I call it the corkscrew. Basically, every time they're turned upside down, money's falling out of their pockets, right? Procurement was hit very hard this year with supply chain issues, and particularly when the ports and the borders were closed. You know, if you were working with international suppliers, you couldn't even get your product in the country, period. Supply chain being so out of whack. If you were a smaller player, you maybe didn't get the guaranteed supply because their number one customer called and wanted it, so they got the stock and you didn't. All of a sudden, that's causing people to find new suppliers, and some of those suppliers maybe were a little bit more expensive. And I think longer term, there is going to be a bit of a distrust there. If you had a supplier that failed you this year, next year it's just going to be a little bit harder for them. So definitely, I think that's going to be a little bit longer term impact. The other piece that's been really hard for supply chain and procurement people is the inconsistency in the order patterns. Things that, you know, maybe you could predict or, you know, get a commitment for a 12 month across the year. All of a sudden, the grocery stores were either wiped out or overstocked. Like there were times when I went to the grocery store, you know, Costco was my key example, and the entire toilet paper aisle, there's no toilet paper. So they just filled it with bottled water. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, well, we have lots of bottled water. There's like 19 pallets of bottled water, not a bit of toilet paper, hand sanitizer, hand wipes, any of that. So I think all of those inconsistencies with order patterns caused really a shift towards agility in production planning. You maybe weren't looking out 3 and 6 and 12 months stocking those ingredients. You said, hey, I just have to be patient and know when I get an order for next week, I'm going to have to go try to get that filled for next week. So I do think a little bit of the production planning legacy practices has maybe been altered to be a little bit more agile, just as it relates to, you know, not sure what orders were going to come in and needing to get those orders filled quickly. If you could get the order filled quickly, you were a winner because you had, you know, grocery store shelves pretty empty. So whoever showed up got product to sell, you know. The last piece is not really a procurement issue, but it hits in terms of the bottom line and that money falling out of the pockets. This really deals more with production team staffing. With so many people on, you know, the stimulus checks and just unemployment and all of that, all of a sudden the workforce has been really, really hard to keep in environments and keeping production plants running. You saw a little bit of wage wars occurring. You saw people that were shifting to different jobs because they could make significantly more money right up the road. As soon as somebody had production team needs, they were, you know, we saw increases locally of, you know, several dollars an hour difference. It's going to be a hard thing to reverse. I don't think anybody is going to want to go back $4 an hour in terms of their pay. So I don't see that changing. I think, you know, we're going to have to just kind of see how that plays out. But I do expect next year to be a higher increased cost of production workers. A couple things they can do, you know, it's always good to secure backup suppliers, reputable suppliers that you know from the industry and you know have helped you in the past. One of the things that we do a fair amount of is, you know, testing and approving alternate ingredients. I think this is such a great time to just realize the consumer expectation for sameness has really softened. People are just happy to get their bag of chips in the grocery store. If it hasn't been there for a month and all of a sudden it shows up, they're just excited it's there. They don't necessarily have that memory must taste just like it tasted last week or last month. So I think when you're starting to do some ingredient substitutions, you maybe have a little more leeway and wiggle room than you have had in the past. So another thing to think through for procurement is just cost savings ideas. I always say, look to your existing label. Sometimes there's ingredients you could shift around. Maybe you could, you know, a really expensive ingredient you could use a little bit less of. Maybe there's some other ingredients you could bundle under something else you have already in your label statement. We have seen a little bit of an uptick in requests for people talking about artificial flavors again. This was such a weird year. We coming off of like 15 years of clean label, clean label, clean label. And now all of a sudden everybody's like, I don't care. It's okay if it's artificial. What do you have for me? It may be time for you to just consider that. I don't know if that'll be a long-term change. I don't think it's as sustainable, but we definitely have had a few people asking about that. I also think fresh eyes on cost savings ideas. You know, procurement people look at the bottom line, look at the bottom line. Maybe engage your regulatory team. Go ask your production floor operators. Go ask some folks over in R&D. Get some fresh eyes on the problem. A lot of people have just different ideas. You know, I was working with somebody recently and they really dug into freight and we really found some savings there for them. So anyway, just another example of an idea. Next, I wanted to show you a little bit more about cost and use. And as you're doing ingredient substitutions and kind of why cost and use matters, really more than just the total cost of the product. So in this example, I'm kind of leveraging our data on our FlavorRush website portal. FlavorRush is designed to give you tools, kind of easy access to not only get samples, but also to play around with some cost and use. So in this example, I use vanilla, and I'm trying to flavor a 5,000 pound batch. And basically what FlavorRush does is it'll auto calculate a cost and use for that 5,000 pound batch. So it takes away the, a penny per pound type thing and actually puts it, if you're making 5,000 pounds of this, do you want to pay $179? Do you want to pay $375? It really puts it in real dollars and cents, just to give you a feel for some different, examples of cost and use and ways you could save. So I think cost and use is always great as well. When you're talking about hidden costs and hidden synergies. So I mentioned already that freight charge. As soon as you start talking about concentration projects as well. So if you're buying, I think the easy example is that vanilla, 1X, 2X, 5X, 10X. If I'm buying 10X and it costs me, a tenth of the price to get the product to me, I'm storing a tenth of the amount of volume. And maybe even I have some optimization of packaging sizes and things like that. These are all hidden, dollars that you could find that would basically help you get your bottom line. So, and then the last journey we're going to talk about from different departments is actually a restaurant owner. I grew up in Michigan, and so Cedar Point has this ride called the Demon Drop. And when you're on the Demon Drop, you're sort of like clicking upward, and you're going to fall. I mean, this whole thing is just going to come crashing down. I still think like we're kind of up, click, click, like we're not sure when it's going to all come to an end. But they've had probably been hit the hardest. We've seen a lot of restaurants closing just permanently, never to be reopened again. We're seeing restaurants in that reduced capacity. Again, trying to get creative with the takeout options, getting more digital means to get product both, ordered and delivered. I do think digital is here to stay. So, that's, if you haven't already gone digital, you need to go digital. I also see the fully stocked restaurant menus really getting reduced. So again, a lot of people didn't know who was going to make it into the restaurant. They didn't know if they were going to have that big Friday night crowd. They didn't want to go buy a bunch of specialty ingredients. So you're seeing reduced menu selections, kind of really less creative options from the chefs. Like if you were a chef and you went to culinary school and you open this restaurant and all of a sudden it's like, all you get to make is cheeseburgers and mac and cheese because that's what sells and that's all, the purchasing person wants to buy. I think, that's going to definitely, that was a short-term fix. Hopefully we get a little bit of that reversed. I think that longer term, we will probably see a little less diversity in those restaurant menus. I know recently I was out to dinner a couple nights ago and I had a fish entree and it had capers on it. I was like, oh, capers on the menu. Like I love capers. And then I kind of looked down the menu. There was actually 3 different items that had capers on the menu. So I think that was one example of, the chef was allowed to buy capers that week and he figured out every way he could think of to use capers, but there were more capers on the menu than you'd ever think. And so I do think that SKU rationalization, kind of menu items getting dropped, is something that's going to be here to stay. Lastly, for the restaurant owner, it's the entertainment bit. I love live music with a beer in my hand and hanging out with friends. We just aren't seeing that entertainment piece with the foods, with kind of in that food service sector. No live music, no dancing, no real big crowds. With that comes that decrease in alcohol sales. Late night, there's no 1 a.m. snacking and going out for cheeseburgers, sometimes at 3 a.m., sometimes at 1 a.m. So with entertainment really not hitting, you're not getting the late night crowds and you're not getting the alcohol sales. So I think longer term, any way we can get that back, if you can find a way to socially distance, I think it'd be fun to have a band and everybody has 6 feet between them. And so maybe it takes a bigger stage or you have them out in the courtyard or whatever. But if you can find a way to entertain people and feed them well, you'll have a good, back in business with a good solid plan. So a couple tips for the food service folks out there, really rethinking your day part in your product mix. One of the things I heard consistently from bakeries was business commuters just aren't passing by the bakery. We don't get people stopping in to grab a dozen bagels or a dozen muffins to take to work. So all of a sudden they just saw this huge loss in the morning day part. And my suggestion there is really maybe shift it to family friendly. Do donuts with dad, muffins with mom. You have a lot more people working from home. You have a lot more kids kind of in this homeschooling. maybe make it, Math Mondays with muffins. I don't know how you want to spin that, but if you can get kids and families a little bit more to replace some of the business commuters that you're not getting, I think that's kind of a fun way to handle that. Shifting next would be the sanitation practices. A lot of restaurants want you wearing the masks in and hand sanitizer everywhere, and I keep thinking, we've got to make this fun somehow. Is there a way we can make it, I threw out this idea of alien car wash, when you're bringing your 5-year-old through into the restaurant, make it like fun. So first we have to put on our, mask, roll up the windows, kids, and now we're going to get through the hand sanitizing station and washing station. And I think anything you can do to make it feel like a fun journey and not intimidating, especially for, small children and things like that, I think that's good. When you think about the sharing of food and the collective ways that we eat appetizers and desserts, anything you can do to really play into food safety practices there, I think is good. I really wanted to share a dessert the other night with my friend. I didn't want to share a spoon. I didn't want 2 spoons in the same plate. So I was a little bit kind of conflicted. If they had options that said, hey, shareable, and we'll separate on 2 plates, or, I used fondue pot as an example. Nobody's ordering a fondue pot. We're not double dipping at all. So if there's ways you can do single serving fondue pot, or, the portioned appetizer that used to be coming out together as one dish, and now everybody gets their own type of plate, I think that's always good. I think you're going to have to look at simplifying the menu a bit. And again, there's ways you can do it, kind of keeping it interesting. Limited time offer is still a great, angle. So maybe take your mac and cheese and do, a pumpkin puree with your mac and cheese, and let it kind of rotate in for the spring. And maybe in the spring, it's all these, fresh vegetables chopped into the mac and cheese. You're not really adding too many new ingredients. You're keeping core to your mac and cheese dish, but you're making it interesting with a few different limited time offer or more regional things. And again, digital ordering, touch repayments, delivery, that's all here to stay. So definitely keeping an eye on that. So now, will these changes have sticking power? I think that's what everybody really is looking for. So here was a study that just came out pretty recently from McKinsey & Co. Basically looking at the types of changes and which ones they think really have sticking power. The ones at the top, there is this notion that consumer needs, and the changing needs and all this remote work, and everybody can kind of getting used to the new normal, as you will. The remote work's probably here to stay. A lot of people did see a benefit with their workforce, whether it was productivity or overall just in the company dynamic. Having less people in the building, maybe it was less time wasted at the water cooler type thing. You do see a lot here around digital, so the online purchases, that last mile delivery, those are predicted, more than 50% of people think that's going to be a sticking change. Longer term, some of the supply chain and, bringing in ingredients from abroad, they're expecting that maybe won't be as sticky. So, some of the supply chain issues, once the, customs and the ports open back up, maybe aren't going to be as much of a problem in the near future. So in general, I think anybody who can stay agile and find ways to innovate, they're going to have rewards several years out. It's no secret, if all of a sudden you started making hand sanitizer, you still had sales in the past, 6 to 9 months. If you started making masks, you had sales for that. What we found, this is a study that, and I used this in the last webinar as well. They look back to the time of depression, and basically during depression, people that took the innovation approach and didn't just stand still, coming out of depression about 5 years later, ended up with about a 30% gain over their counterparts. So don't just stand still. You got to do something. You got to find a way to innovate, find new concepts, find new ideas, and really try to bring them to market quickly. You can't take too long. Everybody else is moving at like laser lightning speed here. So you really got to get to market as fast as you possibly can. So in conclusion, what are we kind of looking for next? We're going to do another webinar in January. We're going to get a full year's worth of data and do some kind of data analysis there. We'll definitely be able to look at this year's ups and downs and also start to see some emerging trends in 21. So hopefully you'll join us in that January webinar as well. Let me go ahead and stop the screen share. So, and I did just want to invite you, Lisa's contact information, my contact information, they're provided there. Please, if you're struggling with some innovation ideas, if you're really wanting to just talk through your new product concepts, feel free to reach out. That's kind of what we're here to do, to help. It's definitely something we enjoy doing. I have a passion for talking about new ideas with people. So I definitely would invite you to call us, email us, definitely reach out to National Flavors if you're looking for help getting those new ideas to market. And yep. And so now we're going to go ahead and look at some of our questions and some of our answers. So, so the questions, you mentioned some customers open to artificial flavors. Is this certain applications? And if so, which ones? I would say the biggest one for me was really in the bakery sector. I think that there were some shortages there. They started to look a lot more at, hey, what are my options? Bakery is kind of funny because a lot of times there's ingredients on your ingredient deck that have bundled, kind of the parentheses, if you will, so chocolate chips, parentheses, all these other ingredients. People found that they already had artificial maybe hidden in the chocolate chip or hidden in the pie crust or whatever. So I think those are examples of times when they were so natural flavor, and then when they actually sat back and read their ingredient statement, they maybe already had artificial on there. So bakery, I would say, is the biggest one for me. When you start talking about restaurants and some of the food service people, that was another area. They're not required to label anything. So they maybe wanted to be clean label, but when push comes to shove and they don't have to label, and most people didn't notice anyway, they just kind of made that shift and didn't really have to label it anyway. So we have one more question. Do you think the launch activity will be slower in Q1? Well, Lisa in the poll, I think, suggests, I think some people are going to speed up. I think some people are going to slow down. Overall, I'm hopeful that it'll uptick, but realistically, I think we're going to come in pretty flat. I just don't think the R&D teams had the time in the lab and the pilot plans had the time to support it. So I just really don't see it super fast as much as we want to think that it's going to be this great year of innovation. I think we're going to come in flat, if not even down a little. So that's where I'm saying, like, people, anything you can do to get new products into the market. I did hear pretty recently that some of the grocery store chains are just saying no new products right now. And so there's been basically a hold. They have so many supply chain issues themselves that they don't even want to monkey with the new stuff. So I think, grocery stores are going to have to be open to that for us to be able to get product into shelf. So anyway, well, thank you guys for joining today on the webinar. And I hope you enjoyed it, and we hope to see you back in January.